even if it seems like you've had a bad day, if you do even one thing or, one small task or one movement forward or something, just, know that you're getting one step closer to where you need to go. And oh, there it is.
What's going
How's
on,
it
brother?
going, man?
How are you?
Good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Awesome, man. It's good to see you again. I feel like we talked in April, but it feels like it's been forever since we had a conversation.
Yeah, man. Yeah, dude. What's been going on, man? How have you been? What's you want to talk about the big race first?
Yeah, I'd love to get into it. Mostly just, like just to talk about like the lessons I learned from that and like just the people over there, about living life. But I really like that thing you brought up about divine timing. That was super cool.
Yeah, man.
And I was thinking a lot about that too.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I sorry, I was just trying to get my headphones working, but I'm just not gonna fucking use them today. But yeah, dude, the divine timing thing is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently because it's so crazy how like when things happen to us, we're so quick to judge whether it's like a good or a bad thing. And I always bring up that story, like the ancient story of the Chinese farmer. I think it's a Chinese farmer in the story, but how like things will happen to him and people are like, "Hey, that's good," and he's like, "Yeah, maybe." And then something else happens and people are like, "Oh, that's so terrible," and he's like, "Yeah, maybe." But like like it's so true, man. It's so true how like things happen to us and we're like, "Oh, fuck, this is the worst thing ever." But you have really no idea like what kinds of things you're being saved from when something like that happens to you and what kinds of things it's so crazy how we just get like tunnel vision. We just get so wrapped up in our own world that we take everything personal and we have no idea what's going on around us in the universe, man.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, like, there must be like a lot of, I think both of us probably have a lot of examples of that, like that divine timing and, situations that we thought were like terrible situations, that we just wondered why this is happening to us, took it personally, like you said. And then in hindsight, you're like, man, like if it wasn't for X, Y, and Z, I wouldn't be here doing this right now. Maybe there's something like that possibly led you to doing this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that's the story of my whole life is like always playing the victimhood card, being like, fuck, I can't believe this happened to me. And then in hindsight, looking back at all the negative things that happened to me, it's like that kind of led me on the path to where I am now. Like this podcast, I started it because um like going through years of depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. I remember like there was one day where just reflecting back on um basically why I wasn't gonna kill myself. And I remember thinking like, oh, it's because of family, it's because of other things. And then I led me into the thought pattern of, okay, like if I'm gonna keep living, like if I'm gonna keep doing this, then I'm gonna try and alleviate this feeling for somebody else. And I ran a volunteer service on the downtown east side here in Vancouver, and there was a couple of different reasons why I stopped that. And then I was just thinking about, like how can I still fulfill this purpose? How can I still kind of get the message out there? And how can I maybe like speak to somebody out there that is representative of who I was when I was suffering? And that's kind of how I started this podcast. And I started off like interviewing people in like Vancouver, just walking around with a selfie stick and like just interviewing random people on the street. And then when the pandemic started, it was like no one was out and about, and even if they were, no one wanted to talk to you. They didn't want to like have interactions with random people on the street. So it was like, okay, we got to make another pivot and kind of change the way that we're going to do this, because I can't really interview people on the street anymore. So it started off with like a couple of Zoom calls like this, and then I slowly started to be able to coerce people to come and talk to me in person, and it's just from there kind of developed into what it is now. So yeah, this podcast is a good representation of that. What I do for work is a good representation of that. Getting leaving my old job and having to get a new job, and everywhere everywhere that I get self-worth from now. Um every aspect of my life, whether it's what I do for hobbies, what I do to make money, um anywhere I'm at now that I'm actually happy to be at was a pivot from something that was terrible.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thinking about why I left my career in civil engineering, even why I started running in the first place. I think that story's been told many times about how I just struggle with my mental health and was just looking for an outlet, and just one day decided that I was going to go out and run a quarter of a mile. And um, I would not have imagined in my wildest dreams that that terrible situation I was in, leading to that one choice and continually making the choice to go back out and again, was going to lead to doing the things that I'm doing now. Um, and falling in love with endurance sports, which ultimately led to me becoming a partner in this business. So that also just is one example of a terrible situation leading to where I am now. So it's just, you just never know where something's going to lead.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. um Dude, I'm excited to hear about this race, though. I'm excited to hear about how everything happened and your biggest takeaways. But before we get to the takeaways, just tell me about the experience. Like, walk me through, like any details you can give, like flying there. What was the journey like? What was it like to do the 5 day trek? It was a 5 day trek to where you started, right? Or
It
I'll
was
just let you
a
tell the story.
12-day trek.
Oh,
It would, and it was honestly one of the most, like, probably up to this point, the most life-changing experience I've ever had. Not only because of how difficult the trek was and how difficult the race was, but just being able to do it immersed in a totally different culture from what Western culture is, and to be immersed with a group of people, who aren't bothered by the nuances of like what the Kardashians are doing, or, like what the politics of the world are. They're just out there in the mountains, just making their living either as Sherpas, going up and down the mountain, or, farming crops, or just, selling a product along the way. And, it was just a totally different environment. And to be able to be a part of that environment and to be able to do a trek that challenged me from top to bottom, going from almost, man, like Lukla was less than 3,000 meters. That was already a high starting point. And then Everest Base Camp was at 5,400 meters. And to be up there and to experience the day-to-day struggles, while being immersed in that, and to be able to race all the way back down 70 kilometers was just a life-changing experience, that I'm processing even at this moment as we speak.
so tell like for people that are listening, like tell like kind of the experience of like flying there, like where'd you fly into and what was the 12-day trip like to get to where you started?
Yeah, so I flew into so I'm from Los Angeles and I flew into Kathmandu, which is a long, long travel date. It's like 32 hours. I mean, it's 17 hours from LA to Singapore and then another 6 hours after 12 hours at Singapore. So I get over to Kathmandu, which is already above 1,000 meters. And then spend a couple days there. And then we go to the local airport and we take a plane from what they call the world's most dangerous airport in Lukla. And it's like this janky, like propeller plane. And I'm sure for safety liability reasons, they don't let you record in the cockpit because they have like a rusty first aid kit in there that I'm sure is not up to date. And the pilots are giving you thumbs up while they're like navigating this chart and the plane's going up and down. And so you get to Lukla, which is like one of the bigger, relatively speaking, towns up there. And that's kind of like the hub of like the start of the trek to base camp. Um, and then we took 12 days to get up there. It was a slow ascent because one of the biggest rules to avoid getting altitude sickness is not too high, not too fast. And the goal, I think one of the mental aspects of the whole thing was knowing that you started this trek and your start line for the race, you haven't even reached the start line of the race. Like, I mean, imagine that was one of the biggest challenges to me is imagine waking up, in your bed for a marathon and going, yeah, I'm tapered, I'm in the best shape I could be, I'm ready to go, I'm loaded up on carbs. You don't get that in this race, you have to focus on like the trek is half the battle. And when you do get to the start line, everybody is cold, hungry, and sleep deprived. And yet there was just so much like just being out in that community, there was so much gratitude even on the bad days. But basically, to kind of sum up what the whole race is, like it's a 12-day trek from Lukla to Everest Base Camp. And then on the day of the race, you travel from Everest Base Camp at 5,400 meters down to Namche Bazaar, which is the Sherpa capital, at around 3,800 meters. And you do that in less than 24 hours.
Man, that is insane. That is insane. And did you see anybody get altitude sickness or anything like that?
As a matter of fact, yes, there thankfully our group for the most part avoided major altitude sickness, but you could see the symptoms everywhere in our group. I mean, I had 3 really bad days on the trek, one of which, um, so every day we did a measurement of our oxygen saturation. And there was one day where I was at 92%. And the next day after the climb, I felt nauseous and just really like tired. And my oxygen percentage just plummeted to 75%. Um, and that day I was just like, uh, I was trying to play it off like I'm cool, I'm cool. And everyone's like, Gandhi, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm cool. But everyone said I was spaced out. Um, there were other people in our group who struggle with appetite. I mean, people struggle with like the mental aspect of it, thinking like because you're doing this climb on this trek and you're already out of breath, there's this whole psychological mental thing going around like I can barely trek this thing. How am I going to run this thing?
Yeah,
So that was going around.
man, that must be so insane, man. What did your mind like play tricks on you too, where you're like, man, I think I'm okay, or am I getting altitude sickness, or like did those thoughts like kind of race around in your head too?
Oh, absolutely. I had to try to keep a positive attitude. Even our Sherpa head, Rajendra Rai, I mean, he was like saying like, what happens happens, but you can't like psych yourself out. And he's basically like, if you think you're gonna get altitude sickness, you're gonna get altitude sickness, You just have to deal with what happens. And honestly, it's very hard not to feel that way because you get the slightest headache or you feel a little nausea or your oxygen levels plummeting or you're just not you're struggling to eat. I mean, I lost like 5 kilos, doing this whole thing. I still haven't gained that weight back. And it starts to play tricks on your mind, like it's just a lot of like um I think one good example is when I was at base camp and the location before base camp, this place called Gorik Shep, which apparently means dead rat because it's like a small saloon town that like it snows. I mean, there's nothing there. There's like 5 houses in Gorik Shep. It sits on top of a frozen sand lake. um, and a lot of people were dealing with this thing where if you wake up in the middle of the night feeling like somebody's stepping on your windpipe because you can't breathe. And I remember waking up gasping for air. And we spent 2 nights there. And I just remember mentally just going, man, is this it? Like I started psyching myself out for the first time and started to panic a little bit. I mean, I think the psychological part was equally as tough as the physical part, and both of them kind of intertwined into each other.
Yeah. And what happens if you get like really bad altitude sickness? Like, do you just die or like what happens to you? Like, I'm not even
You,
familiar with it.
it depends on exactly what happens, but there's this thing that they have no, there's this thing called HACE and HAPE, which they have no explanation for why it happens to certain people, even to this day. It's called so HACE is cerebral edema, where like fluid starts to like fill up your brain cavity. And then there's like HAP, which is pulmonary edema, where like fluid starts to fill up your lungs. And that one, I think psychologically got a lot of people because we had this thing passing around that they call the Kumbu cough, named after the Kumbu ice fall. I just recovered from mine like 3, 4 days ago, but basically everybody's like spitting stuff out and like you just have this like bad cough because of like um the high altitude and low humidity. And I think it started to get in people's heads because you're like, man, am I developing this pulmonary edema? But basically what happens if something like that happens, the only cure is to get down to a lower altitude. And so even though they have helicopters running there frequently, if the weather is bad, then the only way they're going to get you down is on a caravan. And your life is dependent on how fast they can get you down, pretty much.
Dude, that's insane. Because I remember watching the documentary on Nims Die, and I was like, when they had to save that guy. I'm sure you watched it, but like when they had to
Yeah,
save that guy,
Nims is like the mountain Forrest Gump. That guy is amazing.
but I was just like in my head, I was just recalling that part where they had to save that guy that was lost on the mountain, and they were like sharing oxygen tanks. That's crazy. Were you guys using those things as well, like those oxygen tanks? Does that help you?
We had no oxygen tanks, but I believe they had a canister or two within the medical staff just in case. And thankfully, nobody needed it. But to answer a question from before, we actually did have somebody not be able to start the race because of Kumbukov, and they had to be helicoptered down to Kathmandu because their life was essentially in danger. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's good. Yeah, I remember that Nims documentary and um funny quick thing about Nims is he was at base camp just days before we got there. doing his last expedition of the season with his expedition group.
Wow, man, that's so sick. Imagine if you had gotten to meet him. That was so sick.
Yeah, and actually, as a matter of fact, what made this year special was it was the Platinum Jubilee or the 70th anniversary of the very first ascent of Mount Everest by Tenzing Sherpa and Edmund Hillary. So even on the plane ride to Kathmandu, I met Edmund Hillary's grandson on the plane out of
Wow.
nowhere. And then my one of our teammates met I might be butchering his name, but Reinhold Messner, who is essentially I think you might have heard of him in the documentary. He's essentially the like what you call like the goat of like mountaineering. He's the first person to do like the 14 peaks.
Yeah, yeah.
So he was just hanging out in Kathmandu, I assume for the Platinum Jubilee, but seems like a lot of big names were out there.
That's crazy, man. So all this happens before the race. What's like the experience like on the race? Like what's in the beginning, like maybe the morning of race day, like well, what's going through your mind?
Well, I could tell you that the 2 nights I was at base camp, because it was so cold, and because the race was running through my mind at that point, I mean, I could not sleep a wink. Like those last, like I was just in and out of sleep those 2 to 4, like those last 4 nights leading up to the race. Which, like all due respect, it is an honor to stay at base camp because the only two groups that get to stay at base camp are people who do this race and people who do expeditions to Mount Everest. So being able to camp there was an honor. But that being said, I wanted to get the hell out of Dodge at that point. um, but race morning, had to wake up at 2:30 because the ultra people started at 5 in the morning. And I just remember stepping outside the tent after a breakfast, which was the same thing every single day. It was like a basic oat porridge, bland oat porridge. And, we'd step outside and the sun rises early there, like 4:45. And it just looks, they're walking us over. I mean, keep in mind the marathon is over 150 people, but the ultra is only 19 of us. So when they walked us over to the ice fall, there's only a handful of us, the Kumbu ice fall. And everything is tinted like the color of the snow, like blue. It looks like an apocalyptic environment. I have no idea what I'm doing. We get over there 15 minutes before the race, and I have the audacity to take off my puffy and like give it to the Sherpa because they're gonna take it down. It's like my warm gear, don't need it for the race. And I'm like, why did I do this? I will tell you, it was the longest 15 minutes of my life because not only have I been training for this thing for months, but I just trekked. I mean, I made my way to a whole nother country. I trekked for 12 days, and yet this 15 minutes feels like forever. Um, and so we start the race at 5. There's not much fanfare. I mean, the people at base camp, expeditioners and Sherpas, and everyone is watching us like we're the crazy ones. Um, and we kind of just go off from base camp to like the whistle of the marshal, like it's just a simple whistle. And I just remember my hands already being frozen and like just feeling numb. And I was like, man, did I mess up with my gloves? Am I going to get frostbite? Like I was starting to freak out a little bit. But I can tell you that all the international runners were power hiking at this point because any chance that you tried to run even a little bit, your lungs were just going to be so gassed. Meanwhile, the Nepalese runners who were doing the race, they stormed off like they were just running at sea level. It was insane.
Is it just because they're used to the altitude there, or
Yeah, I mean, I think 6 of the 8 of them were actually from the Sherpa clan. So they were just used to the altitude up there and the environment. And they were just flying like they were doing a road marathon. I mean, the course record for the marathon was set by a Sherpa, and he did it in 3 hours and 24 minutes, which is some people's which is some people's road time. That's probably my road time. I mean,
That's
they're on another planet, and we had so much respect for what they did.
that's man, that's insane. That's so crazy, man. So what like how cold is it? How cold is it there? What's the temperature like?
In Celsius, it was minus 15 at base camp the morning we started.
Dude.
It was so cold. And I think it dropped below that in the middle of the night because there was like condensation on top of the tent, on top of my sleeping bag, outside of it. And a lot of stuff was frozen. Like my shoes were hard, rock hard for a while. I mean, it was freezing cold. And then as we went down, it started to get warmer. But for the ultra, we stayed up. I mean, above 4,500 meters for almost 75% of the race. So it continually stayed cold and the weather just kept changing on you. I mean, I've never seen anything like it in any race.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that's like, man. I wouldn't want to be running in negative 15, man. The coldest day of the year, I think last year was like -6. And like maybe like with wind chill was like felt like -15.
Oh
But that's like
man.
the coldest day of the year. I don't think, actually, I might have gone for like a 5K run, but even then it's like just a jog. Like I'm not running a fucking marathon, man. That's insanity. To think that those guys do a full marathon in that weather. That is insane.
It is incredible what everyone does. And even the other runners who did this thing, like, you just have to commend them for like towing the line for something like this. I mean, some of them hadn't even run their first official marathon yet, and they were doing the marathon up there. I mean, it's quite the story to me, is like when you I can imagine them telling somebody like, "Oh, my first marathon was the Everest marathon," and that person just incredulously just going, "What?" You know?
What so the marathon is 42K, right? 42 and a half or something like that.
Yeah,
And then
it's 42, and then the ultra was 70.
70K, man. And you did that, and how long did that take you, the 70K?
I was out there for 18 hours and 7 minutes. Um, it was a long day from 5 a.m. to 11:07 p.m. It was a long day.
Dude, that's insane. What's going through your mind at that? Like, I'm sure like for the whole 70K, you had many different thoughts. And I mean, we talked last time about how you've been training without headphones or listening to music or anything like that. Like, what kinds of thoughts go through your mind when you're doing something like that, other than what the fuck am I doing here?
Well, the thankfully the what the fuck am I doing here didn't come until the very last climb of the race. That was when I came into the why do I pay for this shit, you know? But there was a lot of moments of just like, man, like struggle. Like just there were a couple moments where I was like, man, I don't know if I can do this because I'm like, which is I don't want to say that's unusual for me, but like I know through my experience that when you do a race, you're gonna have moments like that. And yet I felt like those moments almost had me, you know? That's how difficult it was. Mostly the climbing because they had you climbing above 4,500 meters and now you're going at race pace. So every 10, 15 seconds, my body just felt like it had a limiter on it. And I felt like I was just gasping for air. And I thought if I take another step after this, I might either collapse or I might just like, go past the point of no return and get disoriented, which, I can get into that at some point. At one point, I got so disoriented, I almost fell off a cliff and my Sherpa pacer saved me. Um, and it's also the same cliff where we saw Yak fall off the cliff during the trek. But I mean, I think the biggest thing was besides that was I just tried to fixate on gratitude, and I just tried to get into a meditative state and just focus on like the kilometer in front of me. And I think doing that no headphone training and uh I think that helped me out a lot because I didn't have anything to hide away to. I had become so familiar with the patterns of my brain and the thoughts I was going to have that I was able to just tell myself, all right, just keep moving to this next checkpoint. All right, just keep moving to this kilometer, just keep doing this climb. Um, eat these calories, drink this water. And I was able to keep pushing through those moments. But I can tell you it got very tough. And the physical toll of doing those climbs started to wear on me mentally. And I remember the Sherpa looking at me a few times and going, "Man, are you sure you can do this?" Um, he's like, "Do you want, we can stop at this lodge, get some hot tea, um, like figure out if you want to keep going from there." And I remember the third time he asked or fourth time he asked, I just turned to him and I said, "Don't worry, man. Like, I basically said something along the lines of this is all part of the strategy. I mean, like, whatever it is what it is. I'm just going to keep moving." Um, and I just kept going. And um, it's hard not to look around and feel energy from the environment because I don't think there's a single track on the cliffside like that where you're looking at all these snow-capped peaks and seeing like mountain goats and yak and amazing wildlife and not feeling some measure of gratitude and wondering what you did to be able to deserve a spot in a race like this, especially knowing a few years ago you wouldn't even be capable of something like this. So I think I fixated on that a lot and it gave me a lot of strength.
Dude, that's incredible. Wow, man. I wonder if the Sherpas just like kind of have conversations between each other, like, yeah, I got this guy to quit. Yeah, I got that guy to quit. Like the whole time he's like telling you, like, hey, bro, like it's okay if you just want to stop. And you're like, shut the fuck up, man. That's already my inner dialogue. I don't need you saying it too. Like,
It was funny, I think, with the Sherpa Pacers, because I was with this Japanese guy named Takumi. So there were four of us, right? There were two Sherpa Pacers, which, by the way, they gave us the Sherpa Pacers after 33 kilometers onwards because they changed the course leading up to the very last day. So what we started with and what we knew was going to happen every for the last 6 days, every 2 days, met the organizers and they were like, "Oh, this changed. Oh, this changed." And then they were like, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We'll give you a pacer." But I just remember that we had conversations with them. Um, and that stuff always kept coming up. And the funny thing is they held up really well, but by the end of the whole thing at the nighttime you could tell that they weren't runners because when we were doing the last climb even the Sherpas were gasping. It's tough when the Sherpas are gasping for air. I think towards the end for them it was starting to be more like, "I love you, man, but I don't know if I want to be out here anymore." And maybe I need to make this guy quit. But all due respect, I mean, Navraj and Neil were like super supportive, and there's no way me and Takumi could have finished the race without them. I mean, absolutely no way.
yeah, dude, that's so crazy, man. Did the Japanese dude almost fall off the cliff as well? What happened there? How does that happen?
So he was a bit ahead of me, so I don't know where he was at that point. We didn't tie back in until the last 10 kilometers, but how something like that happens is you have an unprecedented roadblock where you're supposed to be on the course and you have to like travel up and around this like very I mean this trail hasn't looks like it's been out of commission for like a long time. It's very unmaintained, like parts of it are just crumbling and falling off. Like it's just it's not even like it's so narrow. I mean, like you can turn if you even lean a little bit to the left, like you're facing the cliffside, and the chance to plummet like a few hundred meters to your death. I mean, and for me, I guess the way that happened is just it was one of those episodes I told you about where like you're just climbing up and I think I pushed the limiter too far and then all the climbing was starting to take its toll on me. The trek was starting to take its toll on me. You can imagine all this stuff is starting to accumulate together. You're not at the start line 100% and now it's starting to affect like your mind state. And the terrain is very technical. None of it is very flat. Even the flat stuff has a lot of rocks on it. So the whole time, like you're engaging your mind just as much as your body because you have to watch where not to turn your ankle and like how to move. And every move has to be intentional. So just mentally exhausted. And so I got really disoriented and I just fell on top of one of my trekking poles and it just knocked the wind out of me. And then I kind of stumbled over to the side and my Sherpa pacer like grabbed me like underneath my armpits and just pulled me by the shoulder. And he was like slowly, like it's like chill, you know. And I was like, I'm good, I got this, and just stood there for like 15 seconds and then started going really slow. I was like, I don't need to go fast on this section. I don't need to go fast, period, because um it was already ingrained. I mean, when it first happened, when that yak incident happened on the trek, going the opposite direction up to base camp, it was already surreal seeing like this big creature just like fall off the mountain and like fall with the thud. Like we saw the whole thing. And who would have known it would be foreshadowing for something that would have almost happened to me? But even then, I thought of it as like, unfortunately, that yak was a warning sign, you know, like be careful on this trail. Um, and it still almost happened to me. Um, but insane is the only way I can describe it.
Dude, that is mental, man. What like what are these Sherpas like? Like what's it like when you get there and you just start meeting them? Like what's like the cultural differences or like what's how like what's it like interacting with these types of people?
Just very simple, friendly people. I think just due to the fact that most of them live out in like Lukla and in the mountains and very strong, sound-minded. You know, they don't overcomplicate things from what I've seen. They're very much like our Trek leader was very much like whatever happens, happens. You know, nothing is impossible. Just keep a positive attitude, um, and just move slowly and just very laughy, like joyful people too. You know, very simplistic, not thinking about too many over complications, just thinking about the next step. Um, and just some of the friendliest people I've ever met, you know, and all of them have amazing stories. I mean, Raju, our Trek leader, has 37 years of experience. So we got to hear a lot about the stuff he's seen. And you know, it means a lot when he says, if you listen to what I have to say, like you will be fine. But whatever happens, happens, you know? Um, and even just like talking to us, I mean, there was a level of respect because for them, you know, normally the people they're guiding in the two trekking seasons are people who are trekking, you know, for them to see people who are absurd enough not only to do the marathon, which is one amazing thing already, but to do the 70K, there's already kind of a mutual respect there. Um, but just in the way they act and the way they present themselves, they're very present in the moment. And although they're very good planners, you know, they're not anxious about the past. They're very just in the moment or thinking about their next move. And I really started to pick up on that.
Wow, man. That's crazy. The whole thing is just such a I've been telling people, I'm like, yo, I have a buddy in LA and he's gonna do this thing. And they're like, what? It's such a crazy feat, man. Like how do you like now that you kind of discuss like kind of the journey and everything there, what like what kind of takeaways do you have? Like what kind of how has this changed your life or shaped you?
I think it's just, I think every single time I do something like this, but especially after doing something like this, one of the things I realize is that you can have a really bad day where you feel like it's all done. Like the days I had with altitude sickness, the days I struggle with my mind, the days wondering if I'd make it to the start line, and even during the race, wondering if I'd finish, and realize that there's still a silver lining in every day. Like, even with the days where I was struggling, the silver lining was always, but I still made it from point A to point B, despite that. Um, and I still got 1 kilometer closer to where I needed to be, despite the struggle I was going through. And tomorrow is a brand new day, another opportunity. And all I have to do now is just stay present and get right. And I think going through something like that, the psychology of dealing with like the altitude, the weather, um, not showing up to the start line in great shape, and then doing this race in 10 times less the time because it took 10 days to get from Namche Bazaar to base camp. And then I did the same thing going the other way in 18 hours. So the psychology of that and all these things has, I think, shifted me into an even more calmer person. Like, life's problems, I think, are still one of the things I learned is that life's problems are still life's problems, like they're still going to stress you out. Like they're still going to, you know, cause tension in your life. But I think it's the way, I think in doing hard things, you learn how to handle these situations better. I think you start to gain a new perspective on it and you start to realize, well, my options are like, this is how I feel, but my options are A, B, and C. Like these are really the three things that are in my control right now. Um, I'm gonna have to choose one of them to keep moving forward. And so I think this whole race just gave me a new calmness and a new perspective on problem solving and just realizing how many things as a society in Western society we take for granted, like a simple meal, like having a warm meal at the end of the day in the trek and having some sort of like bed, even if it was a cold one. Um, Being able to have like a cup of tea, like I started to like those things started to give me immeasurable gratitude because like they meant so much in that moment. Like I posted a picture of tomato soup on my story and everyone was like, it just looks like tomato soup out of a can. I'm like, I know, but it was warm tomato soup at the end of a day, like it's just you start to fixate on gratitude and gain perspective pretty much on problems in life.
Yeah, man, I bet. It's yeah, dude, the next time you're worried about like someone not responding to an email or someone tagging you in something that you pisses you off on Instagram or something, you like think back to the Sherpa and you're like, he's dealing with survival right now and I'm worried about this.
Right. Exactly. It's just the things people worry about. And, I'm not, it's all relative, right? Everybody has everyone has their own Everest or their own challenges. But like, it just, it's just like, you gain such a different perspective on all that stuff. And whatever that person does, it goes back to what Raju was saying, where it's just like, well, you did what you could, right? But what happens, happens.
Yeah. It's and I think, dude, I think that that's like the importance of doing things that fucking suck, is like just changing your perspective completely about some of the other issues that you have to deal with in life. Like my cousin sent me a meme the other day, jokingly, but it was like literally one of the realest things ever. And it was like it's a kind of a popular meme, but the top of it said like, if you start your day off with a run, and then the bottom of it said, then you know that nothing worse can happen to you in that day, or something like that, along those lines of like,
I love
you
it.
know, you've already done the worst thing that's going to happen to you if you like wake up early and go for a run. And he's like, now I know why you run every single morning. And I'm like, seriously, man, for real. Like that's literally it. Like he like sent it as a joke. It said, yeah, here I pulled it up. He said, starting your day off with an early morning run is a great way to make sure your day can't get any worse than how it started. And I'm like, man, for real. Like that's exactly it.
Oh, I love it. That's amazing. I love that he hit the nail on the coffin. I love how he hit the nail on the head with that one, and he was just joking.
Yeah. I'm gonna send it to you when we're done here because it just made me laugh so hard. I'm like, man, that's literally it.
That's so awesome. But man, I absolutely agree about like doing things that suck. I mean, like you get out there and you keep almost a daily regimen of like doing like at least your 5 kilometer runs. I know you're putting in the work for jujitsu, like that reel you put up today about like, you know, owning your failures and making a failure highlight. I mean, absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
Like
dude.
I had to match that, but I was like, there's no way I can match how badass this is, man.
I started my day off today. The reason I did that, I started my day off, well, it actually started with a conversation with the my instructor, the guy that teaches me jujitsu, where we were talking about how a lot of people lack like the fundamentals of jujitsu, because everything that's on Instagram is like the highlight reel stuff. Like it's like, check out this choke you can do, and check out this like flying arm bar, and nobody posts like the fundamentals of like how to get out of a side control, like when someone's just on top of you pinning you down, because it's not like exciting, it's not sexy, you never like, there's no like flashy trick, like it's just fundamental movements. And we were talking about how like people only post their highlight reels, people only post like the coolest things. And after that, that was like a few days ago, and then this morning I woke up and I had like kind of like my to-do list, like my checklist. And it's kind of like a practice that I have. It's not very like fancy or anything. A lot of people do it where I just have a post-it note. I write down things to do. And it was kind of a recovery day. So it was like 200 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, and then a run and a stretch. And as I'm on my and before I went for my run, I do my push-ups, I do my sit-ups, and I film all my jujitsu matches. So I'm rewatching like my all my losses, because I'm like, I need to think about what I want to focus on before my next competition in a couple months, because I just did a competition a couple weeks ago. And so I'm rewatching the matches that I lost, trying to pick on like one or two things I need to learn from, and just two things basically that I can focus on every time I go into training. Like I need to focus on these two things, and I'm rewatching them, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna make a highlight reel of my biggest fuck ups. And then I was going on my run, and I was like, maybe I should actually do it and make it into a reel that I could put on Instagram, just so I can be reminded of it. Like I want to save it on my phone, and I want to make a montage. So like when I feel like skipping training or doing anything like that, like I can just rewatch it and be like relight the fire inside my belly, you know? Like, and I was like, I'm just gonna post it. Fuck it. This is epic. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna post a highlight reel of my losses, man. And it's gonna keep getting bigger and bigger the more I compete.
Yeah, I love that it's going to get bigger and bigger the more you compete because I had this talk with somebody, I mean, a friend just recently about like, if you do things that challenge you and if you do hard things, like you're gonna fail. And if you're not failing, then are you really trying hard enough? Are you really pushing the boundaries of growth? And I also really agree with the fact that people only post their highlights. I think it happens a lot in running too. Um, there's a lot of like, man, look at like reels of like somebody running really fast or somebody bombing down a hill or somebody like crossing the finish line, but there's not a lot of like, I wouldn't call exciting like, hey, check out this video of me and my new foam roller, um, or like check out this awesome new like toe stretch or whatever. It just doesn't grab people, but the truth is that that's like a lot of the work that has to happen in the shadows, for you to be able to do something like this. They call it the unsexy stuff. I mean, I think that makes up the bulk of what you do. And um, when you talk about like failure, like how did you were you always when you think about failure, did you always think about it as something that lights a fire in your belly, or has your perspective on failure changed over time or through jujitsu?
Um, I've, I early in my life, I never like I was one of those guys that was just very like average at everything. I never had like any exceptional skills in really anything in my life, to be honest with you. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. I'm sure a lot of people identify with that. But I developed this mentality pretty early on in life. Um in, school projects or in athletics or really anything that if I'm gonna fail, I want to make it look like I'm not trying. So it doesn't look like I'm trying and still failing. I'd rather be the guy that's like not trying and that's why I'm failing kind of thing. So I fell into a lot of self-sabotage that way in yeah, in many aspects of my life, like with my grades, with my like sports, with anything like that. I never really applied myself because I felt like if it hurt less and it was more expected to not try and then fail than if I actually tried my hardest and failed. And so I never really learned how to lose with grace because I adapted that coping mechanism. Like I was like, I'll just become the class clown instead of the guy that's like trying hard and failing. It seemed like a better avenue to go down for me. And yeah, man, I didn't really start applying myself in a lot of areas of my life until I was probably 17. Like I think grade 12, my last rugby season in high school was when I was like, okay, I want to do this. I want to get better. And I got more competitive with it. And I used to get really mad when we lost or if I fucked something up. I would like be pissed off, I'd be swearing, I'd be yelling, I'd fucking hit people. Like I like I was just a meathead, man. And I remember like I had a rugby coach. I'll never forget it. He probably doesn't even remember me, but he told me he literally looked at me one time. He said, "We win with grace and we lose with grace." And it never impacted me until later on in my life. Yeah, I got into bodybuilding and I only competed one time. I came in fifth place out of like probably 12 or 13 guys. I felt like a failure then. And I never ended up competing again. And it wasn't until I started in jujitsu and just day in and day out, just getting dominated by other people, where it was like it never really clicked with me until like maybe a year or two in. But I was like looking at everybody that was beating me and realized they were in my shoes at one point. Like this person didn't start off being able to dominate someone else. This person started off being the nail, and now they're the hammer. And if I stick with this long enough, that might be like I might be able to achieve that, because like there's a lot of people, like jujitsu is one of those sports where there's a lot of people that you would never, they're very unassuming. Like it's kind of like there's guys that are amazing that are jacked and built like fucking bodybuilders, and then there's guys that are amazing that, you know, they're skinny, they're short, they're like it's you don't have to be built like a fucking Olympian. You just have to put in hours and hours and hours and hours over years. And I thought, you know, maybe that could be me. Maybe I can do that. And so I started by, you know, not wanting to lose, and just kind of I was like, okay, I'll do a competition. And I lost a match in my first competition, and I was embarrassed, and I didn't want anyone to see that. I remember I made a little highlight reel to just be like, this is my first competition. And I didn't include the part of me being choked out in that one match. And then now that I've done a few more competitions, I've had a few more conversations with wiser people than I am. And one of my, like the instructor that I was telling you about, he looked at me the other day. He said, "How do you feel about your last competition?" And I was like, "It fucking sucked, to be honest. Like I didn't get the result I was looking for." And he's like, "Dude, get it out of the way now. Like you want that now. Like you'd rather, like you're young, you're capable, you're a white belt, like you're still learning. Like don't you want to learn these lessons now when you're like not prone to injury? You're not like you don't have a fan, like you don't have kids, you don't have, like you can dedicate so much time to this." And I think that it's been a good way for me to learn that tool, because I don't know if you've heard, do you know the Book of Five Rings, Miyamoto
I
Musashi?
do. Yeah, great book.
Dude, and there's a lesson from that book, and I'm gonna butcher it, so I'm not even gonna try and quote it directly, but basically it's like the idea of like when you learn something in one area of life, you can, and you learn how to master that one thing, you can learn how to master anything. And that has been really eye opening for me now, because it's like now I want more failure. Like I wrote down in my journal, like I'm doing a minimum of 4 competitions this year just to get time on the mats under my belt, just so I can expose myself to failures, because now it even lights a, like it lights a new fire under my ass. I'm like, I'm not going to get pinned in that position again. I'm going to learn every escape I possibly can. Well, I'm not going to get stuck there anymore. Like it just getting on the mat in a competition, it just it exposes your weaknesses in a different level.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I feel like running has taught me so much about like my strengths, but when I go out and do something that's very long or something like this Everest race, it also strips me bare and raw and exposes a lot of the areas I need to work on, both not only in the sport of running, but as a human, because so much of it is like mental and psychological. And one of the things that I really had to work on, as we've talked about before, was just how I dealt with failure, you know, especially after something like the Moab 240, where, you know, I was just beating myself up over the fact that I didn't do the last 5 miles, which is silly in hindsight, you know. I mean, that's 98% of the course that I finished, and I could not be more proud of that. But I think accepting failure with grace was something I struggle with because I was always, you know, I it was always ingrained into me that like failure was bad, and then like there's like this perfectionist mindset thing kind of going around. And I think um I think the things that we see around, we kind of ingrain into ourselves, the things that we grow up with. Um, and now I can say for sure that I just want to fail. Like I want to fail more, I mean, that's my mantra, fail big, don't win small. Um, I just I just think that my failures have taught me so much more about what I can be and my potential than my victories have. And I think I just want to say, like, it's awesome to celebrate your victories. Like, you got to go out there and like blow off steam and like celebrate those small wins. But like at the same time, I feel like if I look back at any single moment where I feel like I've grown as an individual, it's come on the heels of some failure. Um, and I'm always just stoked to, like for you, like getting more time on the mat. For me, that's getting out and continuing to do hard things and ultras that challenge me and just test my physical limits and to um, push me up against the wall mentally as well, so that I can find a new level, or you know, I'll either win or I'm gonna learn is kind of my mentality now with that stuff.
Yeah, I love that, man. I absolutely love that. And I love that it's so transferable, man. And it doesn't take much to learn that. And that's kind of like the if I were to give like anybody listening to this like some sort of a reminder or takeaway is that like I mean, you're an amazing human being, dude. You're extremely inspiring. Like there's not a lot of people that can say that they've done the things that you've done. And I don't think that you have to do those things to feel what I'm like what we're talking about. Like
No,
all like dude, I'm not I'm trying to find a good way to word this, but basically I'll just say the way that my brain's thinking it right now. Like I don't think it's comparable to compare like entering a jujitsu competition or just training in jujitsu to what you do. But we're still receiving the same or
signals.
or a similar signal, yeah. Like the tests don't have to be these life-changing tests. You just have to try. Like you just have to push yourself a bit. And it's so relative for every single person. Like I know that your takeaways are going to be much stronger than mine or anybody listening to this, but anyone can get these takeaways in some sense or relative to themselves just by doing something that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, it has, I think it goes back to what I was saying in that it's all relative to the person, because going back to 5 years ago, running a 5K was my Everest Ultra. That was something that I uh, could not wrap my head around, being able to run for 20 to 25 minutes, for 30 minutes. And because I put myself through that discomfort, I grew. Uh, and you're right that like even though what we're doing are two different things, what we're perceiving is the same. And it goes back to the Book of Five Rings and how these these hobbies that we're doing, these sports that we're doing, are teaching us how to be better at life, because these skills are transferable to life. Like in running, we call it a DNF, a did not finish. But like if you fail something if you fail something at life, you know, nobody's gonna say like, oh, you DNF, like you DNF this, you know, you DNF this, like you can't keep going now. If you fail a project at work, you know, nobody's gonna say, oh, you DNF'd, you know, I guess you can't do this anymore. It doesn't work that way, you know. Um, so I think for me, I think the biggest takeaway really is just like how you handle growth and how you handle failure is probably the biggest thing that I've learned. Because if you are the way I'd like to say it, other than fail big, don't win small, is if you are human, you're gonna fail because you know, fail is to be human, to err is to be human. Like we will make mistakes, but you know, through those mistakes, we learn, we adapt, we grow, and we push forward. And I think that any single person listening to this is capable of that. Whether that be jujitsu, whether that be ultra marathons, whether that be, you know, being an iron chef or like writing your first book and trying to like start by writing your first 200 words or taking a writing course, you know, like it's all the same. And it all boils down to putting yourself in uncomfortable situations to find that growth.
Yeah. One of the one of the things that I've been thinking about, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but do you have like any after you finish a big event like this, do you ever like I'm sure the thought crosses your mind of like, okay, so what now? Like what and it can be like kind of almost like a depressing thought of like, oh, like I have nothing to train for, I have nothing to do now. Do you face that or do you like two-part question? Do you face that? How do you like kind of think about that? Or do you already have something up your sleeve that you're training for now already?
Well, I'll reverse that question and I will say that I already have something else that I'm training for because the season's not over yet. And I've also planned things like over a year and a half ahead. So I've got like bigger goals and bigger goals and bigger goals. But I think there's a bit of uh like micro emotions, or I don't know what the right word would be, like in between and like after like the week after the race and a couple weeks after the race in anticipation of the next one and getting back to like a high level of training where you just have this like emotional letdown because you've done this like amazing big thing and then all of a sudden like you know things are just sort of back to normal. You're adjusting back to the grind of training, and I think there's a bit of a letdown there, but I am able to stay away from it for the most part because I just keep moving from goal to goal. Um, for me, like I have a 100-mile race in 5.5 weeks. Um, and
You're a
uh,
lunatic, man.
10 weeks after that, I have my third 200-mile race. So that'll be 204 miles, about, I guess that's about 325, 330 kilometers. And I'll have a maximum of 102 hours to do it.
You're a maniac, man. Do you what are you able to disclose the locations of those races? Are they
Yeah,
undisclosed or
yeah, absolutely. I think I'm announcing the 200 for the first time on your podcast.
hell
I
yeah.
plan on announcing in the next couple days. But the 100-mile race is in Tahoe, in Lake Tahoe. And that one I have 36 hours maximum to do. And there's about, gosh, like 5,500 meters of climbing in that race too. So there's going to be a same amount of descent too. So that's like ascent and descent. And then the Oregon race has about 9,000 meters of climbing. And
That's the
yeah,
200?
It's in Oregon. Yeah, it's a 200. It's all like essentially like 90, 95%. These are both trail races and mountain races. And that one is in Oregon. Yeah.
That's nuts, man. Your announcement's gonna come out before this does, so you don't have to worry about that. This will go up on the 22nd. So in like almost 2 weeks, a week and a half. But that's crazy, man. Where in Oregon is it?
It's this place called Oak Ridge. It's like 2 hours from Bend, Oregon.
Oh,
And it's gonna be in this wilderness area called the Diamond Peaks Wilderness. Part of it, I think, is around the Pacific Crest Trail. And so they've tried to launch this race for a couple years and it's gone through a few iterations, but they've just had so many fires in the PNW that this is the
yeah.
first year they're really finally able to take it off the ground. And so it's an inaugural race and pretty excited to be one of the first people to do this race.
Okay, yeah, Bend. So it's just south of Bend, you said?
Don't know exactly. I think it's like west, northwest of Bend. Bend might be more of like South Oregon.
Yeah, it's kind of like central south, kind of. I'm just
Yeah.
looking at a map
And
now.
and
I
the
don't know
race is in
Oregon too well.
Oak Ridge.
Oak Ridge.
Yeah.
I'm just nerding out looking at a map now.
Yeah, and it's called Oregon 200 by Go Beyond Racing.
Wow, man. Okay, yeah, Oak Ridge is kind of in between Eugene and there.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, dude, that's insane, man. What do you feel more or less nervous for like 100 mile or a 200 than your 70?
I think in some ways I feel a little less nervous because of the terrain, because I'm not traveling internationally, because I'm not in a foreign land, I'm not in the Himalayas. I think that helps quite a bit, but I'm trying to keep as neutral of a mindset as possible because in my head, I'm like, it's very easy to say I've done 100 miles before I can do 100 again. It's very easy to say I've crossed 200 miles twice. I can do it again. But I know from experience, and I think this applies to anything that, despite your experience, every single time you do something again, you have to treat it in some ways as a brand new challenge. And you can't underestimate the task that it's kind of a balance between you can't underestimate yourself and you can't underestimate the task either.
Yeah. That's kind of like what happened with me with this last jujitsu competition is like and I don't know if it was like something natural that happened within me or the way that I was mentally thinking about it, but even like my girlfriend even said a couple days before, she's like, "You don't seem anxious about this. You don't seem nervous about it." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't feel anxious about it or nervous about it. I don't know why. Whether it's just because like I'm kind of more conditioned to competing now, or I have this understanding that I'm gonna lose matches." Um, but I just don't really feel anxious or like nervous about it. And I remember saying to her, I said, "We'll see how that affects my performance, whether it's a positive or a negative thing." And I don't know if there is a correlation between that, but I didn't do as well as I wanted to. So maybe I've performed better under pressure with anxiety if I psych myself up to make myself feel like it's bigger than it actually is, or I don't know what happened there, but I just yeah, I don't know. It's so weird how the mind can is just so adaptive and versatile.
Yeah, really is. I mean, I don't know that there's a real right or wrong answer for how you should approach something. I mean, even in like professional sports, even in like, UFC fighting and everything, it seems like everybody seems to have a different ritual. For one person, it might be like, I'm going to blast music on my headphones. For another person, it might be like, I'm going to sit here and meditate and do a cold plunge or something. And, for another person might be read a book and not think about this thing that's going to happen in a few hours. And, all of those could be right. It's just, I think a lot of it is perception and just where your mind is at. And I think it's an ever evolving state too. One of the things that I did the day before the Everest Ultra at base camp was, as much as I tried not to think about it, I mean, my goal was I made it my goal to not think about the race. And I still thought about it, but I made that my goal. Like, just, this isn't happening. I'm just gonna pretend like I'm just out here frolicking, and then when the race happens tomorrow, that's when I'll lock in. But for now, I'm just gonna try to keep my mind loose and um with as little stress as possible, because that stress will come tomorrow.
Yeah. And then there's absolute freaks like John Jones, man, who goes out and parties the night before a fight, doing fucking drugs and drinking and
That's not me, man. I'll tell you that.
yeah, no,
I can't
not
pull that off.
not in my world, not in my reality, but some guys can do that and still be fucking animals, but there's just people like that, man. I don't know.
I
It's
I heard a story recently that Michael Jordan used to have like chicken McNuggets from McDonald's for breakfast and then eat a whole steak before every game. I mean,
dude.
there's some things I've heard.
Yeah, there's a dude, there's so many different freaks in so many different sports that just like, yeah, I don't know. They can just do things like that. And man, if it works, it works. Like nobody can top John Jones or Michael Jordan. Like those are the goats,
Can't
man.
talk. No, definitely not.
That's crazy, man. I know, I know you got to get going here in the next few minutes. You were saying you got some obligations to take care of, but in the last couple of minutes here, as we wrap up, like, did you have any messages you wanted to share? Any positive, I don't know, any quotes, anything that you got going on in your mind? Anything that we didn't chat about today?
Um, Honestly, just no matter if thing just going back to what I learned from the race. I mean, even if it seems like you've had a bad day, if you do even one thing, or one small task or one movement forward or something, just know that you're getting one step closer to where you need to go, and just hang in there, and um just no just try to approach everything with neutrality. Whether you have a good day or a bad day, just know that if you control what you can control, and that's like that one small thing, whether it's 1% forward, uh, you will get closer to where you need to go. Uh, and that is progress. No matter how little it is, it's still progress.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I man, there's so many things I wanted to talk to you about today, and I completely blanked on some of them. But I was going to tell you the resolution of my truck. Remember the last time we
Oh
talked?
yeah, yeah. I want to hear
Dude.
about this.
Oh man. Well, finally, I don't remember when it was that we spoke. I think it was mid-April
It was mid-April.
was when my truck got hit. I got my truck back. So, dude, it took so long for my insurance to figure out their life. And like after 6 weeks, they finally get back to me and they're like, "Hey, so it wasn't your fault." And I'm like, "Yeah, no shit." And then my truck was in the shop for like a week and a half. And talk about divine timing. My there was a couple other things that went wrong with my truck mechanically, like literally the day before I brought it to the body shop. So I was like, all right, that worked out well. Like while you guys are fixing the body, do you mind taking a look at these couple things? And then the mechanic there didn't want to deal with it, but I got referred to another mechanic who ended up fixing it in one day. After, so the body shop takes care of it for a few days and it's all good. And then they end up fixing it and detailing it. So my truck's nice and clean and looks good. and then it gets sent off to this other mechanic who ends up he recognizes my last name. He's like, "Oh, are you Danish? Is your dad Danish?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, my dad is." And he's like, "Oh," and he starts speaking Danish to me. I'm like, "No, no, no, like I don't speak Danish, man." And he's like this older Danish dude, and he ends up like diagnosing and fixing my truck in like a day. Charges me $300, and I was so scared it was going to be like a couple grand. And I'm like, fuck yeah, dude, unreal. Like I ended up meeting a new mechanic, took care of my truck, and my truck's all good now. So yeah, talk about divine timing, man. It was
Uh, that explains the divine timing conversation. That makes a lot of sense to me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, man, so weird how the universe works out. Like I was so nervous about that shit, and it's just like all I had to do was just keep focusing on the day. I was gonna ask you, you got a jet, man. I was just gonna ask you why that impact you, why you like that so much, the divine
What?
timing
Oh, the
thing.
divine timing? Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, I think it just impacted me in the sense of like, I've had so many moments like that where I felt like, man, this is such a shitty situation. I'm stressed out. Like, so much is out of my control. And it feels like an out of control spiral. And then in hindsight, you look back at it and you're like, man, this was just one step of a series of steps, or it opened the opportunity to a new path. Or like we were talking about with the run, it opened the door to me even, you know, breathing the same air as like these other international athletes or these Nepalese athletes and doing something like this. I mean, like, um, so it just impacted me in that way because I never heard anyone call it divine timing. And so it kind of was just putting words to something I had been thinking about for a very long time.
Yeah, man. I think of that all the time. Even to borrow some words from Drake, man. Like it's God's plan. Like you have no idea
Yeah,
what he has planned for you. You have no idea.
it's God's
Like
plan.
we're just like literally like following a map that's been mapped out for us, and we're like, man, why did this happen to us? But lo and behold, it's like you were saved from four other things. Like be thankful for what happened. Are you kidding me right now? Like
Right. Yeah.
yeah, it's just something I've been thinking a lot about. But yeah, I got a buddy of mine who wrote down a mantra on the whiteboard that I have. It's now in my kitchen. It used to be in my office, but he wrote down in permanent Sharpie on this whiteboard, everything's always working out for me. And that's the one thing I just keep saying to me all the time, like myself all the time, is like everything's always working out for me. Like I'm gonna worry about this right now when I know that everything's always working out for me. And the
Uh,
way it's crazy how your thoughts shape your reality, which is something that maybe we can talk about next time. But it changed my perspective on life so much just having that mantra.
yeah, man. We'll have to talk about doing round five because I think that is a great topic in itself.
Beautiful. Om Gandhi, thank you very much for your time, brother. I'll let you go. Um, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for being you, man, and thank you for being so giving with your time. I'm very grateful for you, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate you a lot.
I'm very grateful for you, Mark. I mean, it's always a great conversation and thank you for just being you and um man, like I always come out of these conversations learning something new. And just being able to reflect on the things that I've learned and gain a new perspective on those things as well. So I really appreciate these conversations.
Dude, I feel positive. I feel uplifted right now, and I feel motivated to go out and get some, man. So I hope you have a good night. I hope everybody listening has a good night. Much love and peace out.
Peace out, everybody.